Well, after discussing the effects of touch on consumer behavior, after discussing how can you get more money by touching other people, let's turn to something more human. Let's look, for example, whether touching another person can make her or him more helpful. So for example, imagine you are in a store and you don't have enough money to buy what you want to buy. And all that's missing is a dime. So you go to somebody and ask him for a dime. Should you touch the other person while asking for the money? According to the study published by Kleinke in 1977, in which 178 passers-by were indeed asked for a dime, touching the other person is indeed more effective. They found that in the control condition, only 29% were willing to help out. But those participants who were touched were willing to help with a probability of about 51%. Similar results, but for different scenarios, were also observed in 1980 by Willis and Hum in their study, The Use of Interpersonal Touch in Securing Compliance. All in all, they had 320 participants, and they could show that touching the participants on their arm was more effective when they tried to make them sign a petition. When they used touch, 81% were willing to sign the petition, whereas in the control condition only 55%. And in a second experiment, subjects were more willing to participate in a short survey when they were touched. The results were 70% in the touch condition and only 40% in the control condition. Now you might say, well, those studies are already quite old. Aren't there some more recent studies? There are more recent studies, like for example the study by Jules and Guiguin, published in 2009. And in this study, which might be interesting for you if you are a smoker, 368 smoking female students who were in the cafeteria of the university or who were sitting on a park bench were approached by a 20-year-old female Confederate, and she asked them, "Excuse me for disturbing you, but could you please give me a cigarette? My pack is empty." And when she said that, she touched half of the participants softly on their forearm, and half of the participants were not touched. And it turned out that more of the smoking students were willing to help out with a cigarette when they were touched. Whereas in the control condition, only about 51% were willing to give a cigarette. In the touch condition, there were 68%, so a 17% increase. And what is particularly interesting about this study is that after the female students were asked for the cigarette, they were also asked whether they had realized that they were touched. And this is a really interesting question for the whole research field, because one can really wonder whether in all these studies the participants do realize that they were just touched, and whether it makes a difference for their compliance rates, whether they realize it or whether they don't. In this study, they found out that only about 50% were able to recall the contact. Furthermore, it turned out that those who realized that they were touched were more willing to help out, were more willing to give the cigarette. So realizing that you were touched seems to be no bad thing. Maybe it tells you, well, the other person seems to have a serious problem. She or he even touched me, so maybe I should help out. That's one explanation, but to be honest, there are also contradicting results in the literature, so what is going on here is not really clear yet. Let's see what future research tells us about that. Up to this point, we discussed several studies in which only small requests were put forward. For example, please give me a dime, or please sign a petition, or please give me a cigarette. So these are really small requests. And the question of the next study is whether touch can be successful with large requests as well. And the title of the study therefore is An Evaluation of Touch on a Large Request, a Field Setting. The study was published by Guiguin and Fischer-Loku in 2002 in the journal Psychological Reports. Participants were 120 passers-by who were asked by a confederate of the experimenter whether they would agree to look after a large, excited and aggressive dog for a period of about 10 minutes. Because, and that was the reason that the confederate put forward, because he had to go to the pharmacy and of course he couldn't take the dog with him into the pharmacy. So think about a situation, you are just walking on the street and then somebody comes over with a really large dog that looks really aggressive and excited, and now you are asked to look after this giant dog. Would you do that? Well, if the participants were not touched on the forearm during the request, only 35% said, okay, yeah, I will look after your dog. In the group of participants who were touched on their arm, the compliance rate was indeed much higher. In this group, 55%, so 20% more, were willing to look after this crazy dog. Even though this was indeed a larger request than just for asking for a cigarette, I think it's still not a really large request. So maybe one should conduct the study with a more serious request, like taking care of a giraffe or a crocodile for a period of 2 days. I think this would be a larger request. The next study I want to present to you was also conducted by the French social psychologist Nicolas Guiguin, published in the North American Journal of Psychology. And what is particularly interesting about this study is that they combined the effect of touch and the effect of appearance, of status. So imagine you're walking down the street and somebody comes over and tells you, "Hi, I'm from the Association of Parents of School Pupils and I'm conducting a brief survey on the topic television programs for children. Would you participate?" Does it make a difference whether this person wears a suit and a tie, which means he looks like a high status person, or whether this person wears a normal t-shirt and jeans, or whether this person, and this is the low status condition, whether this person wears a dirty t-shirt and torn trousers, and yeah, obviously his hair are also dirty. Well, for the all in all 180 passers-by in this study, the appearance of the requester made a difference, but it also made a difference whether they were touched by the requester on their arm. And it turned out that indeed, in the condition in which the requester was wearing a suit and a tie and he touched the other person, the compliance rate was extremely high in comparison to the other conditions. The compliance rate was 80%, whereas in all other conditions, the compliance rate was much smaller. I want to close this line of research on helping behavior with a study conducted by Dolinsky, in which he tried to answer a question that some of the guys out there might have according to these touch experiments. And I guess that some men out there say, well, yeah, all these study results sound quite interesting. Isn't it sometimes strange if a guy touches another guy on the arm? I mean, if a woman touches me, okay. If another woman touches another woman, okay as well. If a man touches a woman, that's great as well. But if a man touches me, I think this might sometimes be a little bit problematic. And in fact, in cultures, like for example, Poland, in which the following study was conducted, in some cultures in which homophobia is a bit stronger than in other cultures, these concerns might be justified. And this could also be shown in the study by Dolinsky, published in the Journal of Nonverbal Behavior, and the title of the study was Touch, Compliance and Homophobia. And in one of his experiments, 320 passers-by at the railway station were approached and they were told, excuse me, I have a request. During that, half of the participants were touched. And then the Confederate said, and I quote from the study, I have to hurry to catch a train which is leaving in a moment, but I have to mail this letter. And in this moment he showed him a letter in a closed envelope. It was already stamped. And he said, it's really important for me that the letter is mailed in Wrocław. That was the town in which they were. Could you put this letter into any mailbox in the city for me? And it turned out that in all other sex combinations, touching the participant really led to more compliance. They really more often put the letter in the mailbox. But when the requester was a male and the participant was male as well, the compliance rate in the touch condition dropped. Touching the participants under these circumstances in Poland was indeed less effective. So if you are in Poland and you are male, better don't touch other males, because this might indeed backfire.